Here you are.
The lonely Apache took in a deaf
Much
girl,
obliged.
only
Pleasure
to
doing
find she
business
could
with you.
hear his heart. He would wake up before sunrise, tend to his small garden, and sit by the fire in the evening, listening to the wind through the trees. He had chosen this life long ago, after losing his wife and children years back. The grief had made him retreat from the world, and over time people had stopped expecting much from him. Most thought of him as the quiet, lonely man who lived at the far edge of town. He didn't mind being alone. In fact, he liked it. The silence gave him peace. But sometimes, when the wind rustled through the trees in a certain way, he would remember laughter, the sound of little feet running across the floor, and the warm weight of a child on his lap. Those memories came suddenly and left a hollow ache that he quickly pushed away. One late afternoon, as Miguel returned from checking his garden, he noticed something unusual near the path that led into the forest. A small figure was sitting on the ground, looking frightened and lost. At first he thought it might be a stray animal, but as he came closer, he realized it was a girl. She couldn't have been more than 10 years old. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and her hair was tangled from the wind and sun. She was staring at the ground, hugging her knees tightly to her chest. Miguel's heart skipped a beat. It had been a long time since he had seen a child alone. Something about her presence stirred a feeling inside him that he hadn't felt in years. Cautiously, he stepped closer and said, "Hey, are you okay?" The girl didn't respond. She looked up briefly, and he noticed her eyes, large and dark, filled with fear and confusion. Then she turned away, whispering something he couldn't understand. That was when he realized she didn't speak. He leaned down a little, trying to appear gentle, and said, "It's okay. You're safe." The girl didn't move at first. Miguel could see her trembling. He slowly reached out a hand, not to touch her, but to show that he meant no harm. "Come on," he said softly, "let's get you somewhere warm." It took a moment, but eventually she stood up. Her steps were cautious, almost unsure, but she followed him without protest. Miguel led her to his home, keeping his voice low and calm. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and earth, the smell of old blankets and simple meals. He offered her a chair and a cup of water. She hesitated, but eventually took the water in small sips. Miguel didn't rush her. He had learned long ago that trust couldn't be demanded, it had to be earned. He sat quietly across from her, studying her, trying to understand her needs. Her hands moved in small gestures, as if she were trying to tell him something. Miguel had never met anyone who communicated like this before. He tried to make sense of her movements, nodding when he thought he understood and shaking his head gently when he didn't. She was scared, that much was clear, but she was also curious. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every corner, every object. She seemed particularly interested in the fire in the fireplace. Miguel smiled faintly, realizing that curiosity was a bridge he could use to reach her. He fetched a small wooden toy he had carved years ago and placed it on the floor. She looked at it, then at him, and for the first time a small smile appeared on her face. Miguel didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about her, where she had come from, why she was alone, or how long she had been wandering. But he felt a responsibility toward her, a pull that he couldn't ignore. He decided that she would stay with him for now. "You can stay here tonight," he said softly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what to do next." That night, as they sat by the fire, Miguel tried to communicate in small ways. He showed her pictures in an old book, pointing to the images and saying the words slowly. He made simple signs with his hands, hoping she might understand. She watched him closely, mimicking some of the movements, though awkwardly. Miguel realized this was going to be a slow process, but he was willing to take the time. He prepared a small bed for her in the corner of the room, covering it with a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar. She hesitated at first, then climbed in, hugging the blanket to her chest. Miguel sat nearby, feeling a mixture of nervousness and warmth. It had been a long time since anyone had depended on him, and the thought was both frightening and comforting. As the night deepened, the wind outside whispered through the trees, and Miguel thought about the journey that had led him here. He had spent years avoiding people, avoiding attachment, believing that he was safer alone. But this girl, this small, brave child, had broken through that barrier without even speaking a word. He found himself watching her sleep, noting the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers curled around the blanket. She was vulnerable, yet strong in her own way. Miguel thought about the word family, a word that had seemed impossible for him. He had resigned himself to solitude, thinking that love only brought pain. And yet, looking at this girl, he felt something stir inside, a spark of hope, a possibility that connection was not beyond him. He realized that perhaps family wasn't just about blood. It could also be about the bonds we choose, the people we protect and care for. Throughout the night, he kept glancing toward her, ensuring she was comfortable, listening to the quiet sound she made as she breathed. He realized that communication was not always about words. The girl's presence alone was teaching him patience, empathy, and a new way to understand the world. He felt a strange sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in years, as though her arrival had filled a space in his heart that he hadn't even known was empty. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm glow across the room. The girl stirred, blinking at the light, and Miguel handed her a small breakfast. She accepted it with a shy smile. Miguel realized that simple gestures, food, warmth, and attention, could build trust faster than any words. He decided that he would take this one day at a time. He would help her feel safe, help her understand her surroundings, and in turn, perhaps learn from her. He didn't yet know the challenges ahead, the patience it would require, or the ways they would both need to adapt. But he felt ready, for the first time in many years, to open his heart again. As she ate, he tried again to communicate, showing her the letters of the alphabet in a book, pointing to the words as he spoke them slowly. She looked at the letters, then at him, and made small movements with her hands, imitating him. Miguel smiled faintly, feeling a connection growing. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was real. By the end of the morning, he had decided on a name for her, Lila. It was simple, easy to remember, and felt right. When he signed it slowly with his hands and said it aloud, she repeated the movement, her eyes lighting up with recognition. Miguel felt a rush of warmth in his chest. This was the first step in building a bond, the first bridge across the silence that separated them. Miguel knew that the days ahead would be full of challenges, teaching her, understanding her, and helping her navigate a world that had been difficult and confusing. But in that quiet morning, as the sun rose over the hills and painted the room in gold, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in a long time. He realized that sometimes life had a way of bringing unexpected connections, and that even the most lonely heart could find a companion who could bring it back to life. And so, in that small house on the edge of the reservation, a lonely Apache man and a deaf girl began their journey together, unaware of the deep bond that would grow between them. In the silence, there was understanding. In the quiet moments, there was trust. And in the warmth of a small, shared home, hope began to take root in both of their hearts. The next morning, Miguel woke early as usual, the sunlight spilling over the hills and painting his small house in warm shades of gold. He stretched his arms and glanced toward the corner where Lila slept. She was already awake, sitting quietly on her small bed, her dark eyes scanning the room with curiosity. Miguel felt a gentle tug in his chest. He had never expected to feel responsible for someone again, and yet here he was, already caring deeply. After a simple breakfast of bread and milk, Miguel decided it was time to help Lila feel more at home. He gathered some old books, scraps of paper, and pencils, placing them on the small wooden table near the fireplace. "This is for you," he said softly, pointing to the supplies. He didn't know if she would understand him, but she tilted her head, her eyes lighting up, and slowly reached out to touch the pencils. Miguel smiled, realizing that curiosity could be their bridge to communication. He began with simple gestures, pointing to objects in the room and signing their names with his hands. Leela watched carefully, mimicking his movements, though clumsily at first. Miguel realized it would take time, patience, and practice, but he didn't mind. This was part of the journey, learning how to connect without relying on spoken words. By mid-morning, Leela had learned to recognize several basic signs: water, eat, bed, and yes or no. Miguel felt a quiet pride swell in his chest. He had not expected to feel this kind of joy again. She was learning quickly, and in return, he was learning patience, attention, and a new way to understand the world. After a while, Miguel suggested they take a walk outside. The fresh air and open space seemed to relax Leela. She wandered slowly, touching the rough bark of trees, crouching to examine small flowers and stones. Miguel followed closely, speaking softly and pointing to birds in the sky, the distant hills, and the patterns of clouds. Leela's face brightened with every new discovery. Though she could not hear the sounds of the birds, she could feel the movement of the wind and the rhythm of nature around her. As they walked, Miguel shared stories of his past, pointing to objects in his home that reminded him of them. He did not speak of sorrow or loss in detail, yet he hinted at them through gestures and brief words. Leela listened intently, nodding or tilting her head in understanding. It was remarkable how much they could communicate without speaking aloud. Miguel felt a quiet joy at seeing her engage so fully with the world, despite her deafness. One afternoon, Miguel sat by the fire and began humming an old Apache melody his mother had taught him. The sound filled the room softly, curling around the walls and furniture. Leela paused, watching him, her eyes wide with curiosity. Then slowly, she placed her small hand on his chest. The gentle rise and fall of his heartbeat reached her in a way sound never could. She smiled faintly, and Miguel felt a warmth spread through him he hadn't felt in years. It was at that moment he realized something extraordinary. Even though Leela could not hear in the usual sense, she could perceive emotion, rhythm, and feeling through connection. His heartbeat, steady and slow, became a language they both understood. A quiet understanding passed between them, and Miguel felt a bond grow that went beyond words or sound. Days turned into weeks, and their routine took shape. Miguel continued to teach her signs, letters, and how to write simple words. Leela learned quickly, her determination shining through her shy demeanor. In return, she taught Miguel the patience of observation, watching her face, her hands, and her gestures to understand what she wanted to say. One rainy afternoon, a thunderstorm rolled over the hills. The wind rattled the windows and the first drops of rain tapped sharply against the roof. Leela froze, fear in her eyes, and Miguel immediately went to her side. He knelt down, holding her gently and placing her hand on his chest. "It's okay," he said softly. She felt his heartbeat, steady and reassuring, and slowly relaxed. Miguel realized then that their connection was deeper than he had ever imagined. Leela could sense his calm, his care, and it comforted her more than words ever could. As the storm raged outside, Miguel told her stories without speaking, signing with his hands, using gestures, drawing simple pictures on scraps of paper. Leela followed along, asking questions through her signs, and Miguel answered patiently. They laughed softly when mistakes were made, their smiles bridging the gap of silence. By the end of the storm, the fear had faded, replaced with a sense of security and trust. Miguel began to notice subtle changes in himself. He found that he looked forward to mornings with Leela, to teaching her new things, to seeing her curious face light up with each discovery. He even found himself humming quietly while working outside, knowing she could feel the rhythm through his movements and heartbeat. He realized that she had brought life back into his once lonely world. One evening, Miguel took Leela to the garden he had been tending for years. He showed her the small sprouts of vegetables and flowers, pointing to each one and signing their names. Leela knelt down to touch the soil, feeling its texture and warmth. Together, they planted seeds in neat rows, pressing them gently into the earth. Miguel watched her carefully, noting how she learned from observation, how she mimicked his movements, and how her small hands handled the soil with care. Through these simple activities, Miguel discovered that teaching Leela was not just about her learning, it was about him learning too. He learned to slow down, to see the world from her perspective, and to value the quiet moments of connection. He found joy in small successes: her first correct sign, the first letter she wrote without help, the first time she hummed a rhythm she felt from his heartbeat. The neighbors began noticing Leela more and more. Some would stop and wave as she and Miguel walked past. Leela, shy but brave, began responding with small waves or gestures. Miguel watched quietly, proud of her courage. He realized that while the outside world could be uncertain, Leela's resilience gave him confidence that they could face anything together. One particularly quiet afternoon, Miguel sat with Leela near the fireplace, watching the flames dance. He tried a new method of communication, drawing simple pictures of emotions on paper: happy, sad, scared, excited, and pointing to them while signing. Leela responded eagerly, pointing to the pictures that matched her feelings. Miguel realized that even though they came from very different experiences, they could share a world of emotion together. In the evenings, Miguel would often sit in his favorite chair, Leela curled up nearby with a book or drawing pad. Sometimes he hummed softly, and she would rest her hand on his chest, feeling the rhythm of his heartbeat. These moments were quiet, simple, but profoundly meaningful. Miguel felt a sense of peace and contentment that he hadn't felt in years. He realized that life, even in silence, could be full of love, trust, and understanding. Miguel also began teaching Leela practical skills: cooking simple meals, fetching water, gathering firewood, and caring for the small garden. Leela absorbed these lessons quickly, often surprising Miguel with her ingenuity. When she didn't understand something, she would watch him carefully, her eyes sharp and attentive, and try again until she succeeded. Miguel admired her determination and patience, seeing in her a reflection of the resilience that had kept his own ancestors strong. Despite the challenges of communication, Miguel felt an unspoken bond growing stronger every day. He learned to read her gestures, her facial expressions, and even the smallest movements of her hands. Leela, in turn, learned to anticipate his actions, to recognize the rhythm of his days, and to sense his moods without a single spoken word. Their lives became intertwined in ways neither of them had expected, connected by trust, care, and the silent language of the heart. By the end of the week, Miguel and Leela had established a comfortable rhythm. They had learned each other's quirks, preferences, and small habits. Miguel realized that the quiet house, which had once felt empty and lifeless, was now alive with presence, energy, and warmth. Leela had brought light into the corners that had been dark for too long. Miguel often reflected on the unexpected turn his life had taken. He had not set out to take in a child, especially one who could not hear in the usual sense. And yet, he could not imagine life without her. She had opened a part of his heart that he had kept closed for years, teaching him patience, love, and the quiet power of understanding someone without words. And so, their days continued, slow, patient, and filled with discovery. Miguel and Leela explored the limits of their world, learning from each other, teaching each other, and building a bond that transcended sound. In the quiet moments by the fire, in the garden under the sun, in the shared rhythm of work and play, they were learning the true meaning of connection. The week ended with Miguel sitting back in his chair, watching Leela draw quietly by the fire. He realized that their journey had only just begun. There would be challenges ahead, moments of frustration, misunderstanding, and difficulty, but he felt ready to face them. For the first time in years, he felt hope. He knew that together, they could overcome anything, because they had already discovered the silent language of trust, care, and the beating heart that connected them in ways words never could. Over the next few weeks, Miguel and Leela settled into a gentle routine. Each day felt fuller than the last, filled with small discoveries, quiet lessons, and moments of shared laughter. Miguel watched Leela grow in confidence, seeing her curiosity bloom like the tiny flowers in his garden. He often marveled at how resilient she was, how, even without hearing, she approached the world with courage and wonder. One morning, Miguel noticed Leela sitting outside on the porch, staring at the horizon where the sun was rising. Her small hands were resting on her knees, and her expression was thoughtful. He joined her silently, sitting down beside her and pointing to the glowing sky. Slowly, he made gestures in the air, showing the sun's movement across the sky. Leela followed, nodding, and then drew a small sun on her notepad. Miguel smiled, understanding that she was not only observing the world, she was trying to communicate her thoughts and feelings about it. That day, Miguel decided to take their lessons further. He wanted Leela to understand not just words, but the world around her. He led her into the forest nearby, showing her the different plants, the rough texture of tree bark, the patterns in the soil, and the tracks left by animals. He encouraged her to touch, to smell, to feel the forest with all her senses. Leela responded eagerly, running her fingers over leaves, crouching to inspect stones, and leaning close to listen. Well, as close as one could without sound. Miguel realized that she experienced the world fully, just differently than others. As they walked, Miguel shared stories from his childhood. He signed slowly, pointing to objects and mimicking actions. Leela watched carefully, then repeated the gestures. She didn't just mimic, she added her own movements, her own style, and Miguel realized that she was beginning to tell her own story as well. Their hands became a silent conversation, a rhythm of understanding that grew stronger each day. One afternoon, while Miguel was tending to the small garden, Leela picked up a small watering can and began helping. She carefully poured water onto the plants, occasionally looking up at Miguel to see if she was doing it correctly. He smiled, nodding with encouragement. "Good job," he signed, pointing to her hands and then to the plants. Leela's face lit up with pride. Miguel felt warmth in his chest, realizing that these small acts of learning and cooperation were weaving a deeper bond between them. As the days passed, Miguel noticed subtle changes in himself as well. He found himself talking more, even if it was just to the walls or to the fire, explaining things as if she could understand. He hummed quietly while working, knowing she might feel the rhythm through his heartbeat. He even caught himself smiling at memories of her laughter, or the way she concentrated so intently on a new task. Leela, in her own quiet way, had begun to heal parts of him he didn't realize were broken. One evening, a sudden storm rolled over the hills. The wind picked up, rattling the windows and bending the trees outside. Leela froze, her small body tense with fear. Miguel immediately went to her side, kneeling down and taking her hand. He placed it gently on his chest. "It's okay," he signed, using his hand slowly and deliberately. She felt the steady beat of his heart, the calm rhythm grounding her. Her fear softened, replaced with trust and comfort. Miguel realized that this bond, silent but powerful, was deeper than any spoken word. She could hear his heart in ways no one else could. After the storm passed, they returned to the fire, where Miguel pulled out scraps of paper and pencils. He began drawing pictures, animals, trees, and small scenes from daily life. Leela watched intently, then began drawing too. She drew her house, the path she had walked before meeting him, and the forest around them. Miguel leaned over her shoulder, signing and pointing, asking her questions about each drawing. Leela responded with gestures, nods, and small movements of her hands. Each exchange felt like a conversation, each drawing a story shared between them. Through these quiet moments, Miguel noticed that Leela was opening up in ways he hadn't expected. She began to share more of her past, not through words, but through drawings and signs. He learned that she had lived a difficult life before coming to him, moving between homes, struggling to be understood, and often feeling alone. Miguel's heart ached for her, remembering his own loneliness, and he resolved to give her the care and stability she had never known. At the same time, Leela began to understand Miguel more deeply. She learned to read his gestures, his expressions, and even the subtle movements of his body. She noticed when he was tired, when he was worried, and when he felt joy. Miguel was amazed at her ability to perceive his emotions without spoken words. He realized that she was not just learning from him, she was teaching him too, showing him the power of connection through observation, empathy, and shared silence. One quiet afternoon, Miguel showed Leela an old photograph of his family. He signed carefully, telling her about his children and wife and the love he had lost. Leela watched silently, then reached out and placed her hand over his heart. She didn't need words. Her touch, gentle and reassuring, told him that she understood his pain and that she cared. Miguel felt tears prick his eyes. He had never expected a child to offer such profound comfort, and yet here she was, silently mending parts of his soul. Days turned into weeks and the bond between them grew stronger. Miguel began teaching Leela practical skills, cooking, cleaning, tending the garden, and caring for animals. She absorbed each lesson eagerly, her determination evident in every action. When she made mistakes, Miguel gently guided her, using his hands and gestures to show her what to do. She learned quickly, surprising him with her intelligence and adaptability. Each success, no matter how small, was a victory they celebrated together. Miguel also began to notice the joy she brought into the little house. Her laughter, though silent, filled the rooms with warmth. Her curiosity sparked new experiences for him. He explored nature more, cooked new recipes, and even revisited old hobbies he had abandoned years ago. Leela's presence reminded him of the beauty of small, ordinary moments, and he realized that life, even in silence, could be rich and fulfilling. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Miguel began humming softly again. Leela rested her hand on his chest, feeling the beat of his heart. They didn't need words. In that simple act, they shared a language deeper than sound or speech. Miguel understood then that this bond, the silent understanding, the trust, the shared moments of life, was something rare and precious. It was a connection that could not be broken, a bridge built from empathy, patience, and love. As the weeks passed, Miguel began to plan small adventures for them. They hiked the hills near the reservation, explored streams and hidden paths, and watched wildlife together. Leela's eyes would light up with every new discovery, and Miguel felt a sense of pride and joy in seeing her confidence grow. He realized that she was thriving, not in spite of her deafness, but in a way that was uniquely her own. Miguel also began reflecting on his own past. He saw how his grief had shaped him, making him withdrawn and fearful of attachment. But through Leela, he discovered that opening his heart again was possible, that love and care could return even after deep loss. She had awakened something in him he thought he had lost forever, a sense of purpose, a desire to nurture, and the ability to trust again. By the end of the month, Miguel and Leela had created a life that was both simple and rich. They communicated through gestures, drawings, and the rhythm of shared activities. They explored the world together, learning from each other, teaching each other, and slowly building a deep, unspoken understanding. Miguel realized that the bond they shared was stronger than any spoken language. It was a bond of trust, empathy, and the silent music of two hearts in rhythm. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the hills, casting long shadows across the small house and garden, Miguel watched Leela carefully tend to a row of young plants. He smiled quietly, feeling a sense of pride and love he had never known before. Leela paused, looking up at him, and he saw the gratitude and trust shining in her eyes. In that moment, he understood that their connection went beyond words. It was felt, understood, and cherished in every gesture, every glance, and every shared moment. Miguel knew there would be challenges ahead, moments of misunderstanding, frustration, or fear. But he also knew that together they could overcome anything. They had already built something extraordinary, a family not defined by blood but by trust, care, and love. And in the quiet evenings, as they sat by the fire or tended the garden, Miguel felt a sense of hope he had not felt in years. For the first time, he believed that even the deepest loneliness could be healed, and that hearts could truly hear each other, even in silence. As the weeks turned into months, Miguel and Leela's life together grew richer, filled with routines, laughter, and quiet discoveries. Miguel had never imagined that a small child could bring so much life into his home. Leela had grown stronger, braver, and more confident. She explored the world around her with curiosity and courage, touching the trees, examining the soil, and watching the birds in fascination. And Miguel, in turn, had learned patience, empathy, and the meaning of trust in ways he had forgotten existed. But life outside their small home began to stir. The neighbors had started noticing the little girl who lived with Miguel. Some were curious, others skeptical. "Is she really safe there?" they whispered among themselves. A few people wondered if Miguel, a quiet man known for his solitude, could truly care for a child. One afternoon, a neighbor stopped by, cautiously asking questions about Leela's well-being. Miguel answered as best as he could, signing simple gestures and explaining with gestures and a few words. The neighbor left, not fully reassured, but Miguel wasn't deterred. He knew he would do whatever it took to protect Leela and ensure she felt safe. One morning, a letter arrived from the local authorities. They had learned that Leela had no legal guardian and wanted to visit, to ensure she was properly cared for. Miguel felt a twinge of worry. He had expected some challenges, but he hadn't realized the scrutiny would be so immediate. He looked at Leela, who was busy drawing by the fire, her face focused and serene. He knew he had to show her that everything would be okay, even if he felt nervous himself. When the authorities arrived, Miguel welcomed them into his home. Leela watched silently, her eyes curious but calm. Miguel explained everything he could, how he had found her, how he had been teaching her, and how they communicated through signs, gestures, and drawings. He showed them the small garden she had been helping with, the books they were using to learn letters, and the drawings Leela had created. The officials were impressed by the care Miguel had taken and the progress Leela had made. They could see the trust and love between them, even if it was not expressed in words. After the visit, Miguel realized that the outside world could bring challenges, but he also understood that it could bring recognition of the bond he and Leela had formed. They had created a safe, nurturing home, and now others could see it too. Leila, sensing Miguel's worry, reached out and placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. He smiled, feeling reassured by the simple gesture. In her own way, she reminded him that love and trust were stronger than any doubt or obstacle. Over time, Miguel began introducing Leela to the community more carefully. They walked to the small market in town, where people had begun to recognize them. Leela, shy at first, slowly started waving at neighbors, responding to gestures and smiles. Miguel watched proudly as she gained confidence. He noticed that while the world might judge them initially, people could also be kind, patient, and understanding when given the chance. One day, while walking home from the market, Leela spotted a small stray puppy near the roadside. She ran to it cautiously, and Miguel followed quickly to ensure her safety. The puppy wagged its tail, sensing her gentle nature. Leela knelt down and held the puppy close, her face lighting up with joy. Miguel laughed quietly, feeling warmth in his chest. That small moment reminded him of the joy that simple acts of kindness could bring, and how much Leela's presence had opened his heart to life again. However, not all moments were easy. One afternoon, while playing near a stream, Leela slipped on a wet rock. Miguel's heart jumped and he rushed to her side. She had only a small scratch, but he realized how fragile life could be, especially for someone so small and brave. He carefully cleaned the wound, signing words of comfort, and she responded with a small smile. That day, Miguel understood the depth of responsibility he had accepted. Protecting Leela meant being vigilant, patient, and unwavering in his care. As the seasons changed, Miguel and Leela continued to grow together. He taught her how to cook simple meals, showing her how to measure ingredients, stir gently, and watch the fire. Leela was a quick learner, sometimes surprising Miguel with her cleverness. In turn, she taught him the importance of seeing the world through fresh eyes, appreciating small wonders, and finding joy in everyday moments. Their bond had become more than just guardian and child. It was a partnership of hearts and trust, a connection deeper than words could convey. Miguel also began to notice Leela's remarkable ability to sense emotions. Even without hearing, she could tell when he was worried, tired, or joyful. She would respond with gestures of comfort or celebration, sometimes even before he realized how he felt. One evening, as Miguel sat by the fire, feeling the weight of responsibility, Leela placed her small hand on his chest and looked up at him. Her eyes said what words could not. "I understand you. I am here. You are not alone." Miguel felt a warmth spread through him, a reassurance that no matter the challenges, they faced them together. The outside world continued to test them, though. A few more neighbors expressed concern, and Miguel had to navigate their questions and judgments carefully. He realized that while their home was a sanctuary, the world beyond required courage and advocacy. He approached each encounter with honesty, patience, and dignity, showing others the love and care he provided for Leela. Slowly, people began to respect their bond. They saw that Leela was thriving, happy, and safe, and that Miguel was a dedicated, loving guardian. One afternoon, Miguel and Leela decided to take a long walk into the hills surrounding the reservation. The sky was clear, and the sun cast a golden light across the landscape. Leela ran ahead, exploring with excitement, while Miguel followed, smiling at her energy and curiosity. They stopped at a small clearing where Miguel had once camped as a boy. He showed her how to gather firewood and build a small, safe fire. Leela watched carefully, imitating his movements. Together, they cooked a simple meal over the flames. Miguel realized that teaching her skills of self-reliance and confidence was as important as providing love and care. That evening, as they returned home, Miguel reflected on how far they had come. Leela had grown in so many ways: confidence, courage, and joy. She had taught him patience, empathy, and the value of shared silence. Their home, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with laughter, learning, and warmth. Miguel knew that challenges would continue to come, but he felt ready to face them. Their bond, tested and strengthened, was strong enough to withstand anything. One particularly memorable moment came when Miguel took Leela to the local school playground for the first time. Other children were curious about her, and some even hesitated to approach. But Miguel encouraged her to explore, to interact, and to find her own way of connecting. Slowly, Leela began to engage with the other children, using gestures and expressions. Miguel watched with pride as she discovered that her deafness did not limit her ability to connect with others. She was learning resilience, adaptability, and confidence, lessons that would shape her for life. Back at home, they spent evenings by the fire, sharing stories and drawings. Miguel had begun to notice a change in himself as well. He laughed more freely, cared more deeply, and even allowed himself to dream again. Leela had opened his heart to life, reminding him that connection, love, and trust were possible, even after loss and isolation. He realized that he was not just her guardian, he was also her companion, her teacher, and her family. And she, in turn, had become the light in his once lonely world. As winter approached, Miguel and Leela prepared the house together. They gathered firewood, cleaned the rooms, and stocked up on supplies. Leela worked diligently, her small hands busy with chores, but she also found time to play and explore. Miguel watched her, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. He knew that she had taught him more than he could ever teach her, that love could heal, trust could grow silently, and the heart could speak louder than words. By the end of the season, Miguel understood that their journey was far from over. Life would bring new challenges, questions from the outside world, moments of fear, and the inevitability of change. But he also knew that they had built something strong, lasting, and rare. Their connection, forged in patience, empathy, and shared experience, would carry them through whatever lay ahead. One quiet evening, as the snow began to fall lightly outside, Miguel watched Leela by the fire, drawing pictures of the hills and trees she had explored. She looked up at him, her eyes bright and full of trust. Miguel placed his hand over hers, feeling the warmth of her small fingers and the rhythm of her heart. He smiled, realizing that in her he had found a companion, a teacher, and a family he had thought lost forever. And so Miguel and Leela continued to live, learn, and grow together. They faced the world with courage, patience, and a bond that no challenge could break. In the quiet moments of life, in the shared laughter and discoveries, they had found something extraordinary. A family built not by blood, but by trust, love, and the ability to hear the heart, even in silence. The seasons had come and gone, and with them, Miguel and Leela had grown closer than ever. The small house on the edge of the reservation was no longer quiet and empty. It was alive with laughter, learning, and the gentle rhythm of two hearts beating in trust and love. Miguel often paused in his daily work, glancing at Leela as she played, drew, or explored, and felt a warmth in his chest he had long thought impossible to feel again. Leela had grown confident in her abilities, moving through the world with a sense of curiosity and courage that amazed Miguel every day. She understood him in ways that went beyond words, sensing his moods, reading his gestures, and responding to his heart without needing speech. And Miguel had grown as well, learning patience, empathy, and the quiet power of understanding another person in their own unique way. Their bond was extraordinary, silent to the ears, but loud in every emotion, gesture, and heartbeat. One crisp morning, Miguel decided to take Leela on a special walk to a place he had loved as a boy, a hilltop that overlooked the valley below. The path was steep, lined with trees and rocks, but Leela climbed with determination, holding Miguel's hand when needed. At the top, the view stretched for miles, the sun casting golden light over the hills and valleys. Leela's eyes widened as she took it in, and she signed excitedly, pointing at the horizon, the hills, and the trees. Miguel smiled, nodding, proud of her awe and curiosity. Sitting together on a large rock, Miguel showed Leela how to feel the wind, notice the way it moved through the branches, and watch the patterns of clouds in the sky. He explained, through gestures and drawings in the dirt, how the world was full of stories waiting to be discovered. Leela listened intently, her small hands tracing the shapes he drew, her eyes sparkling with wonder. Miguel realized that teaching her about the world was not just about knowledge. It was about sharing experiences, emotions, and the joy of discovery together. As they watched the sun dip lower in the sky, Miguel began to hum softly, an old Apache melody his mother had taught him. Leela reached out and placed her small hand on his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. She smiled, her eyes full of trust and understanding. Miguel felt tears well up, realizing that she truly heard him, not with her ears but with her heart. In that moment, all his fears, worries, and loneliness melted away. He had found a family, a companion, and a connection deeper than words could ever convey. Returning home, Miguel and Leela prepared a small dinner together. They worked in harmony, passing ingredients, stirring gently, and laughing softly when mistakes were made. Leela had grown so skilled in the kitchen, and Miguel found himself marveling at her intelligence and determination. But more than that, he marveled at her heart, the kindness, empathy, and joy she brought into every corner of their home. Each evening spent together reinforced the bond they had forged, stronger and more enduring with every shared moment. One evening, Miguel sat by the fireplace, Leela drawing quietly on a pad of paper. He looked around the room, noticing how alive it felt. The drawings on the walls, the small plants by the windowsill, the warmth of the fire, and the soft light spilling across the floor. He realized that Leela had not only transformed his days but had healed his heart. He thought of the years he had spent in solitude, and he understood now that loneliness, while sometimes protective, had also been a barrier. Leela had broken through that barrier with courage, trust, and love. The outside world continued to watch them, but now the whispers had changed. Neighbors smiled when they saw Leela, some even stopping to offer small gifts or words of encouragement. Miguel realized that their love and care for each other had begun to change the perceptions of others. People saw not just a lonely man and a deaf girl, but a family built on trust, understanding, and shared experiences. Miguel felt a quiet pride in that recognition, but he knew the real reward was the bond he shared with Leela, the life they had built together, brick by brick, heartbeat by heartbeat. One snowy morning, as winter painted the hills in white, Miguel and Leela ventured outside to play. Leela laughed as she rolled in the snow, making small piles and patting them with her hands. Miguel joined her, scooping up snow and gently tossing it her way. They laughed together, their eyes sparkling with delight, their hearts full. In those simple moments, Miguel realized that happiness was not found in grand gestures or wealth. It was in connection, trust, and shared joy. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Miguel signed carefully, telling Leela how proud he was of her bravery, curiosity, and kindness. Leela responded with her own signs, telling him that she loved him and that she was grateful for everything he had done for her. Miguel felt a surge of emotion. She had come into his life alone, scared and unsure, and now she was confident, joyful, and deeply connected to him. He understood fully that love, even without words, could heal, teach, and transform. One of the most touching moments came when Miguel found Leela quietly sitting in the corner, her hand resting on his chest. He realized she had grown accustomed to sensing his emotions through his heartbeat. She had learned to listen in a way that transcended sound. Miguel felt a wave of emotion sweep over him. How remarkable it was that she could hear his heart, understand his feelings, and respond with empathy and care. He knew that this bond was rare, precious, and unbreakable. As time went on, Miguel began teaching Leela more about their Apache heritage, the traditions, the stories of their ancestors, and the wisdom passed down through generations. He signed and drew, showing her the old symbols, explaining their meanings, and recounting tales of courage, resilience, and kindness. Leela listened attentively, her hands following his gestures, her eyes shining with understanding. She was learning not only about the world around her but also about her roots, her identity, and the strength of the people who had come before her. Together, they faced small challenges too. There were days when Leela struggled with frustration, unable to express a thought or complete a task, and days when Miguel felt the weight of responsibility pressing heavily on his shoulders. But through every challenge, they found ways to support each other. Miguel would gently guide her, showing patience, understanding, and encouragement. Leela would respond with determination, creativity, and resilience. Each obstacle became an opportunity to grow stronger together, deepening their bond. One quiet night, as snow fell softly outside, Miguel sat with Leela near the fireplace. He watched her trace patterns in the air, signing words she had learned, and he realized that she had grown into a remarkable young girl. She had learned not only to communicate but also to understand, to empathize, and to share her heart freely. Miguel felt a deep gratitude for having been entrusted with her care, and for the lessons she had taught him about love, trust, and the power of quiet connection. In the final weeks of winter, Miguel decided to plant a special flower in the garden, a symbol of growth, hope, and the life they had built together. Leela helped him dig the soil, place the seed, and gently cover it. They stood together, hands pressed together over the earth, and watched as the tiny seed became a symbol of their bond, a bond nurtured with care, patience, and love. Miguel realized that life, much like the seed, needed attention, understanding, and protection to grow. Leela had taught him this truth, and together they had cultivated something beautiful. Finally, one evening, as they sat together watching the fire flicker, Miguel reflected on their journey. He remembered the first day he had found Leela frightened and alone, and he marveled at how far they had come. She had brought laughter, courage, and love back into his life. He had given her safety, guidance, and care. And together, they had discovered a connection stronger than words, a bond that could hear hearts, understand emotions, and endure challenges. Leela placed her hand on Miguel's chest, feeling his heartbeat as she had done countless times before. She smiled, her eyes shining with trust and love. Miguel returned the smile, feeling a profound sense of completion. In her, he had found family. In him, she had found home. Their hearts beat together, quietly and steadily, in a rhythm that spoke louder than any words could. And so life continued. Miguel and Leela faced the world together, not as a lonely man and a deaf girl, but as a family, united by trust, care, and the extraordinary ability to hear and understand each other's hearts. In the silence, they had found connection. In patience and love, they had found joy. And in the shared rhythm of their lives, they had discovered something rare and beautiful, the true meaning of family. Their story, though quiet and simple in its beginnings, had grown into a testament to resilience, hope, and the power of the heart. Miguel and Leela had proven that love does not require words to be real, and that understanding can bridge any silence. Together, they would continue to explore, learn, and grow, their hearts forever in tune, their lives forever intertwined. And on a quiet evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Miguel and Leela planted the last flower in their garden, hands pressed together, hearts beating in harmony, knowing that they had found a family in each other, a love that needed no words, only trust, care, and the simple, profound rhythm of the heart.